My name is Naledi Dlamini. I'm 28 years old. Every Thanksgiving, my grandfather's chair stayed empty. No one was allowed to sit in it. My father always said it was out of respect. Last Thanksgiving, dinner was almost over when he suddenly pushed that chair away from the table, looked straight at me in front of 30 relatives, and quietly said, "From today, you are no longer my daughter." No shouting. No argument. Just silence. My mother lowered her eyes. My cousins stopped eating. Someone quietly started crying. I picked up my coat and walked toward the front door. Then I noticed something strange. An elderly woman I had never seen before was standing outside the dining room window. She wasn't looking at the house. She was looking only at my father. And the expression on her face told me she hadn't come for Thanksgiving. She had come to witness something. Naledi grew up believing the same story everyone in her family believed. Her father, Saifo Dlamini, told relatives again and again that she had turned her back on the family. He said she had rejected the future he planned for her. Saifo had built a successful transport company, and he expected Naledi to work beside him one day. He often said she was throwing away a great opportunity. But Naledi wanted a different life. She did not care about big offices or expensive cars. She chose to work as a community literacy coordinator, helping children in poor neighborhoods learn how to read and giving them hope for a better future. She loved her work, even though it paid much less than the family business. At every birthday, holiday, and family dinner, someone reminded her that she had wasted her potential. Her father would proudly talk about her younger brother, Lethabo, calling him the future of the Dlamini family. Everyone smiled and praised him while Naledi sat quietly, feeling like she no longer belonged. No matter how hard she worked or how many lives she changed, it was never enough for her family. Only Grandpa saw things differently. He never judged her for following her heart. Instead, he always encouraged her to keep doing good, even when nobody noticed. Before he passed away 2 years earlier, he held her hand, smiled gently, and whispered, "Character grows where applause doesn't." At the time, Naledi thought they were simply kind words from a loving grandfather. She had no idea those words would one day explain everything that was about to happen. When I arrived at my parents' house that Thanksgiving afternoon, something immediately felt different. The driveway was full of cars, and I could hear my relatives laughing inside, but the moment I walked through the front door, the room became strangely quiet for just a second. Everyone smiled at me, but their smiles did not feel real. It was as if they were expecting something to happen. I greeted my aunts, uncles, and cousins, yet many of them quickly looked away. Some barely spoke to me at all. As I walked toward the dining room, my eyes stopped on Grandpa's empty chair. Just like every year since he passed away, nobody had touched it. His plate was not there, but the chair stood in its usual place at the table. I noticed several relatives looking at it again and again before looking at my father. It almost seemed like they were waiting for someone to give a signal. My father, Saifo, was acting even more strangely. He kept checking the clock on the wall every few minutes. Sometimes he looked at his watch right after looking at the clock, as if he was counting every second. He hardly joined the conversations and seemed unable to relax. My mother was no different. She kept moving the same plates and glasses over and over again. Everything was already perfectly arranged, but she still picked things up and put them back down. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she avoided looking directly at me. Even our family pastor looked uncomfortable. He sat quietly with his hands folded, speaking far less than he usually did. Every now and then, he let out a deep breath and glanced at my father with worried eyes. As dinner finally began, nobody seemed to enjoy the food. The conversations were short, and the laughter sounded forced. It no longer felt like a Thanksgiving celebration. It felt like everyone was waiting for a moment they already knew was coming. I was the only person sitting at that table who had no idea what they were all waiting for. Halfway through dessert, just as everyone expected my father to say the Thanksgiving prayer, he slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. The room became completely quiet. I thought he was about to thank everyone for coming, just as he did every year. Instead, he turned and looked directly at me. His face showed no anger. His voice stayed calm, which somehow made every word hurt even more. He began talking about my life as if I were a complete stranger. He said I had wasted every opportunity he had given me. He reminded everyone that I had refused to join the family transport company. He said I had walked away from my responsibilities and chosen a life that brought no honor to the Dlamini name. He told the family that while others were building success, I had chosen a path that made no difference. Every sentence felt carefully prepared, as if he had practiced it many times before that night. Nobody interrupted him. My mother kept staring down at her plate. My brother remained silent. My aunts and uncles avoided looking at me. Even the children stopped eating because they knew something serious was happening. Then my father slowly walked to the fireplace. He reached for the framed photograph of me as a little girl, smiling beside Grandpa many years ago. It had always been displayed with the other family photos. He looked at it for a moment before carrying it across the room. Without rushing, he placed it gently beside my dessert plate. Then he looked into my eyes and quietly said, "Take it with you. You won't need to come back." For a few seconds, nobody moved. The entire room seemed frozen. I felt every pair of eyes watching me, waiting to see if I would cry, argue, or beg him to change his mind. But I did none of those things. I slowly stood up from my chair. I looked once at the old photograph beside my plate. Then I picked up my coat without saying a single word. My silence filled the room with more weight than any argument ever could. Suddenly, it was everyone else who looked uncomfortable, while I walked calmly toward the front door. I had almost reached the front door when the doorbell suddenly rang. The sound stopped everyone where they were. Nobody moved for a moment. My father looked toward the door with a worried expression that I had never seen before. One of my uncles slowly walked over and opened it. Standing outside was an elderly woman. She wore a simple coat and held only a wooden walking cane. She carried no bag, no gift, and no food for Thanksgiving. She quietly stepped inside the house and looked around the room with calm eyes. None of my relatives recognized her. They looked at each other, confused about why a stranger had come to our family dinner. Then I looked at my father. The color disappeared from his face. His confident expression was gone. For the first time that evening, he looked frightened. His hands tightened at his sides, and he could not hide the shock in his eyes. It was clear that he knew exactly who this woman was. The elderly woman gave a polite smile and spoke in a soft voice. "I'm sorry for arriving without an invitation," she said. "I know this is a family gathering." Nobody answered. The room was completely silent. She slowly walked farther into the dining room until she stood beside Grandpa's empty chair. She rested one hand on her walking cane and looked around the table. "My name probably means nothing to most of you," she continued. "Many years ago, I worked beside Naladi's grandfather when this family. Business was only a small dream. I knew him long before success came. I knew the man he truly was." Everyone listened carefully, trying to understand why she had come after so many years. Then she looked directly at my father. Her face remained calm, but her words carried great weight. "I made a promise to your father," she said quietly. "I promised him that I would only come after I witnessed the family make its final choice." The room became even quieter. Several relatives looked at each other with confused faces. My mother frowned slightly. My brother seemed completely lost. Nobody understood what those words meant or why this woman believed tonight was so important. Nobody understood. Except my father. He lowered his eyes without saying a single word. For the first time that night, the man who had controlled every moment of the dinner looked like someone who knew something was about to happen that he could no longer stop. The elderly woman looked around the room before speaking again. Every person at the table waited quietly for her next words. Then she gently rested her hand on Grandpa's empty chair and said, "Before your grandfather passed away, he shared one great fear with me. He was never afraid of losing money. He was afraid that wealth would one day hide people's true character." Nobody said a word. She continued, "He believed that people often behave well when they know someone important is watching. But true character appears when there is nothing to gain and nobody is paying attention." Then she revealed something that surprised everyone. "Before he died, your grandfather asked several trusted friends to quietly observe this family over time." Some relatives looked around the room in confusion. She quickly added, "No, there were no hidden cameras. Nobody followed you in secret. There were no private investigators and no secret files. She smiled gently. It was much simpler than that. She explained that Grandpa had asked old friends, church members, former employees, neighbors, and local charity workers to simply pay attention during their normal lives. Whenever they naturally met members of the Dlamini family, they quietly noticed how they treated other people. For the past 2 years, they had simply been watching. They watched who greeted workers with respect. They watched who helped strangers without expecting praise. They watched who visited lonely people after everyone else forgot them. They watched who spoke kindly when nobody important was listening. And they also watched who looked down on others, who treated people differently because of money, and who believed their position gave them the right to humiliate others without consequences. The elderly woman slowly looked at every face around the table. Your grandfather never wanted a test that could be passed in one afternoon, she said. He believed real character is shown through small choices made over many days. Then she looked directly at my father. This Thanksgiving dinner was never the test, she said quietly. It was only the final observation. Suddenly, everything that had happened that evening felt different. My father had believed he was making the final decision about my place in the family. But someone else had been watching every decision long before tonight ever began. For a few long seconds, nobody spoke. Then another knock came at the front door. Everyone turned to look. It was not a lawyer carrying legal papers. It was not a business partner or an important investor. Instead, ordinary people began walking into the house one after another. The first was a retired school principal. He smiled kindly at me before looking at my family. I don't know much about your family business, he said. But I know your daughter. He explained that several children at his school could not afford school uniforms. Their parents were struggling, and some children were too embarrassed to attend class. Without telling anyone, I had quietly paid for the uniforms. I had asked him never to tell the families where the money came from because I did not want anyone to feel ashamed. The room remained silent. Then a grocery store owner stepped forward. He looked at my father before speaking. There were many times when elderly customers came to my store without enough money to buy food, he said. Before I could even ask what to do, Naledi had already left money with me. She told me to use it whenever someone truly needed help. She never asked for thanks. She never wanted her name mentioned. I lowered my eyes because I had never expected anyone to talk about those moments. Then a former employee from Grandpa's company quietly entered the room. He looked at everyone sitting around the table. When your father was in the hospital, he said, looking at my father and brother, many family meetings were about the company and the future of the business. But every single week, Naledi came to visit him. Sometimes she stayed for hours. She read books to him, brought his favorite tea, and simply sat beside him when he was too weak to speak. His words filled the room with heavy silence. One by one, more people shared simple stories. None of them talked about money. None of them talked about success. They talked about kindness. They talked about respect. They talked about quiet acts that expected nothing in return. Only a few minutes earlier, many relatives had silently agreed with my father. Now they could no longer look him in the eyes, because the truth was being spoken by people who had absolutely nothing to gain. After everyone finished speaking, the room became completely silent again. The elderly woman slowly turned toward my father. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult him or try to embarrass him in front of the family. There was no anger on her face. There was only sadness, as if she had hoped this day would never come. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Saifo, she said softly, your father knew you better than you realized. My father tried to say something, but no words came out. The woman continued, many people believed your father's greatest dream was to build a successful business. They believed he cared most about trucks, buildings, contracts, and money. She slowly shook her head. They were wrong. She placed one hand on Grandpa's empty chair. Your father once told me that businesses can fail and be built again. Money can be lost and earned again. But if a family loses kindness and compassion, it becomes much harder to rebuild. Everyone listened carefully. He was never afraid that this family would become poor, she said. He was afraid that success would make some people believe they were more important than others. He feared that pride would slowly replace love, and that respect would be replaced by fear. My father's eyes stayed on the floor. The woman took one slow step closer to him. Your father believed that real success means nothing if it costs you your humility. A business can make people wealthy, but only character makes people worthy of respect. Nobody moved. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. Tonight, she said quietly, you did not disown your daughter. She paused, letting every person in the room hear each word. Tonight, you revealed yourself. The silence that followed felt even heavier than before. My father looked around the room, hoping someone would defend him. Nobody did. The relatives who had agreed with him only minutes earlier now looked away. Even my brother remained silent. My mother quietly wiped tears from her eyes. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my father without answers. The man who always controlled every conversation. The man who always had the final word, could not speak at all. In that moment, everyone finally understood that the person standing alone in the room was not me. It was him. The weeks after Thanksgiving were unlike anything our family had ever experienced. For the first time, people stopped pretending that nothing had happened. The truth spoken that night stayed in everyone's mind. Relatives who had always followed my father's opinions began thinking for themselves. Many of them realized they had spent years agreeing with the loudest person in the room instead of asking what was actually right. One by one, they started reaching out to me. Some called me on the phone. Some came to visit me in person. Others sent simple messages that said, I'm sorry. None of them had been forced to apologize. Nobody told them they had to. They apologized because they finally understood how easily they had judged me without knowing the full story. They admitted they had believed my father's words for years without ever asking me how I felt or why I had made the choices I did. I listened to every apology without anger. I did not remind them of the pain they had caused me. I did not ask for revenge. I did not try to embarrass anyone the way I had been embarrassed. Instead, I went back to living the same life I had always lived. Every morning I returned to the community center, helping children learn to read. I visited elderly people who needed company. I listened to families who were struggling. I continued showing up wherever someone needed a little kindness, even when nobody noticed. Slowly, something unexpected happened. The same relatives who once avoided asking for my opinion now came to me whenever they faced difficult decisions. They trusted me to listen instead of judge. They knew I would tell them the truth with kindness instead of trying to control them. For years they had respected my father because they feared disappointing him. Now they trusted me because they felt safe with me. That was the difference Grandpa had always wanted us to understand. Fear can make people obey for a while, but kindness makes people stay. Respect, earned through compassion, lasts much longer than respect demanded through power. Without saying a single speech, our family finally learned that true leadership is not about controlling people. It is about serving them. That lesson changed our family more than any business success ever could. The following Thanksgiving felt completely different from the year before. As I walked into the house, I noticed something had changed. The rooms looked the same. The family photos were still hanging on the walls. The dining table was set just as it had always been. But the feeling inside the house was no longer heavy with fear. People were smiling naturally. Conversations were honest. Nobody seemed worried about saying the wrong thing. Grandpa's chair was still standing in its usual place at the table. Just like every year, nobody sat in it. But this time, it no longer felt like a reminder of authority or control. It was simply a quiet way of remembering the man who had loved us all. Before everyone took their seats, I walked over to the chair carrying a small handwritten card. I gently placed it on the seat and stepped back. The card read, "The place of honor belongs to the person who makes everyone else feel welcome." Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned the message. Everyone simply stood there reading those words for a few quiet moments. Before dinner began, my father quietly looked at the chair. He looked at the card, then looked around the room. Without saying a single word, he turned and walked out of the dining room. Nobody stopped him. Nobody followed him. For the first time, the dinner did not depend on one person's approval. The rest of us slowly took our seats. Soon the room filled with simple conversations. My cousins laughed together. My aunts shared stories. My uncles asked about each other's lives. People listened instead of trying to impress one another. Nobody was competing for attention. Nobody was pretending to be perfect. As I looked around the table, I finally understood what Grandpa had been protecting all those years. It had never been the chair. It had never been the family name. It had never been the business or the money. He had been protecting something far more valuable. He wanted our family to remember that love is stronger than pride, kindness is greater than power, and respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. At that moment, I realized Grandpa's greatest wish had finally come true. Kindness had become the loudest voice in the room.